So we were living in Saranac Lake, and Owen was really involved on Twitter then. That was his main outlet for posting, and I just remember one day he was in his office, and really, I could tell he was stressed out because he was really quiet and focused and not really moving from his computer. So I was like, oh man, like something bad's happened, because he usually gets like that when, it's not necessarily the best news. And I was like, what's going on? He was like, well, people are, really coming at me because I've said, this guy shouldn't put his kid on hormone blockers. And I was like, why? Because I was like pretty new to everything. He was like, oh, it's a 3-year-old kid, it's like child abuse, or like putting him on hormone blockers so he doesn't hit puberty.
There are no trans children. That's just insane. I mean, there's really no trans anybody. It's a mental illness. And when and this comes from someone who had a transsexual piano teacher. Like, I learned how to play piano from a transsexual. Like, I'm not ignorant or hateful when it comes to these people. Like, my transsexual piano teacher taught me how to play Moonlight Sonata when I was 9. But children don't have the mental capability of saying any of these things. They can't drink, they can't drive a car, they can't vote, but yet at 5, they can say what gender they think they are and then face irreparable consequences and then enter a group of people that has a 40% suicide rate. So I kicked the hornet's nest on that because there was this guy named Jesse Thorne who worked for NPR, real hooked up, and had said that his son was really a girl because of the way he acted at 3. I was very vocal about my opposition to that. And then the next day, my agent and manager both dropped me because I wouldn't apologize or go back on what I said.
To really dot all the I's and cross all the T's, because Jesse Thorne had mentioned that it was something that they would come across and discuss as a family, and that it would be a possibility. Now, I think he also said in a tweet that, there is a age where it's too young. So where things get tricky is if you don't believe in transitioning a child at all, then there's no age limit really. Because the argument is an adult's an adult, they can make whatever decision. And then you can also try to define the line of when is somebody old enough to make a life-altering decision, for the rest of their life. Like, you can't rent a car until you're 21 or 24 or something. 25, yeah, so exactly. So at 18 legally, I suppose, you could transition, or maybe even earlier. So anyway, so the point was, he was taking issue with the fact that it was a 3-year-old boy who is being treated as a girl, and that they were in the process of transitioning, which would or could include hormone therapy. And Owen was saying all of that process was abuse.
He was like, well, all these people in Hollywood are saying I'm like transphobic and like blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, well, if he's getting a lot of heat online and, all these people are after him, I was like, I guess you should just, reel it in. And at that point, I didn't really understand the need to take such a strong stance and stick to it. But he just had that that he was like, no, this is like very detrimental if we allow this. And I was like, okay, keep going. I'm like, but it's really affecting you, like you're really stressed out. And I was like, is it really worth it, to care about something that's miles away?
I understand why people cuck and take a knee and go with the devil, but I couldn't do that. Vox Day was talking about that. Someone said that me and him have so much courage, and he said it's not even necessarily about courage. It's about like some men are incapable of cucking to that degree, where some men would be like, well, I have to do it for my family. I have to be able to make a living, so I'm going to go along with this stuff, and I'm not capable of that. I was like, that's child abuse. That kid is it's a coin flip if that kid kills himself when he grows up, because at 3 years old, you can't do that. And there's certain types of men that are like, you can't abuse your kid in public like that and have me sit here. And all the people that were trying to shame me, all the Hollywood people that were like, oh, I can't be associated with you anymore, but I'm like, that tactic not only didn't work at me, I would point my finger at them and say, you're sick. Like, you're on the wrong side on this thing. And it destroyed a lot of my friendships with Hollywood people because, you know, they would publicly say like, oh, Owen's lost his mind, Owen's all this stuff. I'm like, no, I haven't. That's a 3-year-old child.
It was pretty nuts. Not many people came to his defense that he really thought would, and it was, I think, a eye-opening moment for Owen. I think that's when he realized the direction society was heading.
And then Joe Rogan had me on to talk about it, and which I gave him a lot of love and tremendous respect and leeway because he did that, because it was such a cool thing of him to do in my book.
One of the things that Joe Rogan is famous for, or infamous, was the confrontation with Carlos Mencia. And within, as it's been explained to me, within the comedy community, he was looked at as a hero because he was lending a voice to those who didn't have a voice. A lot of comics were suffering from the joke stealing. They knew that what was going on, but they were afraid to call it out, and Joe wasn't.
But he's also a gatekeeper. Like, his whole role is like when a man is about to leave the plantation, Joe Rogan brings him in, you know, tells them what they want to hear, and then gets them back on the sodomy train.
When you go against the powers that be, or you somehow cross some line, and gatekeepers will no longer give you access, and you're basically ghosted. They don't talk to you anymore, and you get ostracized again, for lack of a better term. So the reason I told the Carlos Mencia story was because that, for a while, was, you know, Rogan wasn't afraid to go against the grain for the greater good, and that's why he had the hero status. And when he had his podcast and it was doing really well, he could give a voice to people, you know, who otherwise wouldn't have gotten one. So that Owen's situation was exactly that, where, you know, here is all these things that are happening to him, his manager's dropping him, his representation's dropping him, that he was able to go, Rogan was kind of like, hey, you know, come on my podcast, you know, let's let people hear your side of the story, or hear your story. And that fit right in line with what people understood of Rogan.
That to me is almost even worse, because a guy like Joe Rogan knows how evil this stuff is, and he won't really support the opposition to it. He goes radio silence right when you need him the most.
On Owen's last appearance on Rogan's podcast, one of the moments that was notable was when Rogan was bringing up Owen's tweeting. And Owen had a really good way of putting the way that he utilizes social media, because for one, when something's in text form, tone and context is often lost. That's a given. But Owen would do something he would call idea sonar, and he would put out something controversial, or he'd post a picture, or, you know, he'd say something, and it was in the reaction where you would learn something. And when you're a stand-up comic and you're in a club, you can say something controversial on stage, you get immediate feedback. Did you get laughs? Did you get nervous laughter? Did you get anger? Did you get boos? So similar kind of learning process through social media based on reactions, and there's an expression, you get the most flack when you're over a target. So the interactions that would be the most, it's not really trolling, because trolling, you're purposely trying to upset people. With Owen, it was more of like, oh, there's something here, let me find the comedic element. And one of the best examples, I think, is when he called the UFC gay, which is hilarious now in hindsight. But in the moment, there's, people get upset, and then he just doubled down, because he's like, all right, clearly there's something here. So doing those kinds of things that are provocative, even in text form and picture form. Rogan had mentioned that he would call it like manic tweets, and he's like, what's going on? Run your tweets by me was the famous line. And Owen, was kind of pushing back that's part of his process. And I think that's maybe where some of the disconnect happened, where it was Owen's clearly like, this is, comedy is my art, and I will kind of mine the field of information and, get things that way. And I think Rogan was kind of like, if you don't, this is just me reading between the lines, but if you have to stop that, otherwise you can't play with the cool kids.
The backlash affected everybody. When you're being attacked by the global media and they're calling you a Nazi and they're calling you evil, I mean, these are people that had just begged me to be at their wedding. That's what made this all so disgusting, is not only did some of them know me, they were like, they would beg for my approval like a month before. And now they're calling me an evil Nazi. Eliza Schlesinger texted me like the next day, like, I just heard from a bunch of writers something about you and transgender kids. Is it true? And I just texted back what had happened. Then I never heard from her again. That was exactly what would happen all the time. And these are people that have no right to judge me or anybody in this situation. And so, and I just felt a coldness, like a distance from everybody. And when the global media is attacking you, it makes people that don't understand how it works, it's very, very scary. Your heart never goes under 100 for like a month. There's everyone that looks at you, you think just read something about you. And so everyone was scared. My brother, my mother, they were out. My dad was a mess because their jobs they thought were being threatened. They didn't feel safe. Like, the relationships that they had with people were being affected. So it was intense, and it really bonded Amy and me tremendously, even more than having a child, I think, because I finally knew I could trust somebody, like a woman. And because she didn't, not only did she not even think about leaving me, I felt like she was in the fight from the whole time.
I didn't think it was that big of a deal because I thought he was kind of blowing it out of proportion. Like, I was like, oh, this can't be that bad, it's just another squabble. But then when I saw how quickly everyone dropped him, and then all of a sudden there was no more tour dates in the future, it was really intimidating. At the time, my concern was, it was primarily just losing the gigs, because I wasn't really sure how we were going to go about, making up that money. We were living a lot less lavishly, so we had some room, to let go of some income. But it was still a little intimidating because I had quit my job and we'd really kind of moved away thinking Owen could still tour, and that was taken away.
Well, I was doing tree work again for money, hauling branches for my brother for 20 bucks an hour. And then I would rewrite children's books for money. Like, The Giving Tree, I made the Trading Tree. I made it about how if you just didn't cut down the tree, you made more money. I just started building my YouTube because it wasn't as controlled as the Hollywood world, because no one would hire me. It was like, bam. Blackballing is very real. All that time of like building up an audience, building up a talent that is very rare. And so then I started, I didn't back down. They wanted to cuck me. They wanted to make me scared. And I just went even harder on Twitter. And when I'd be attacked, people would put a little bear icon in their name or their tweet to let me know that they weren't a troll. And that's when the bears started rising.